Okay, so now you've learned how to construct truth tables for complex sentences, and hopefully you've tried these practice problems, but now let's go over them together. So the first one, 1C, only contains one atomic sentence, right? A, which means we have a two-column truth table, which is really simple to start filling in. So we've got the first column with true and the second column with false. And that's all of the possibilities we have to be concerned about with one atomic sentence. So now we need to start filling in this table. As you can see, I made this second part over here just one column. And that's because it's the same as our antecedent, right? We have our antecedent, our horseshoe, and then the consequent is the negation of the antecedent. So we'll do the antecedent, then we'll fill that in, and then we'll do the negation so that we know what our consequent truth value is. So let's start by filling these in. I did repeat A. So we're going to have true, and we're going to have false, right? So I did this because it's easier to look at the biconditional with having those truth values right there next to it. So now let's do the other side of that biconditional. We have the negation of A, which is pretty straightforward. We flip those truth values, false and then true. And now we evaluate this biconditional so that we can have the truth value for our antecedent. From the characteristic truth table, which I hope you remember, biconditionals are true when the truth values match and they're false otherwise. So here we have true and false because we have it and its negation, and then here we have false and true. So it's false on both of those rows. So now we come over here, and since this section is exactly the same as our antecedent, we're going to copy those over, false and false for A if and only if it's not the case that A. And then we're going to do the negation there, right? So we're going to take the negation of that sentence. So it's going to be true and true. So now we can go to that material conditional, that center column, that's our main connective. That's why we have it bolded here. And we can look at the truth values of our antecedent and our consequent and evaluate the whole sentence. So on this first row, we have the antecedent as false and the consequent as true. That means we have a true material conditional. The material conditional is only false if we have a true antecedent and a false consequent. So this is true. And then in our second column, we have the same exact thing, right? We have our false antecedent and our true consequent, so it's true here. So we finish the truth table, we look at that center bolded column of our main connective, and we can see that this sentence is true on both rows. So for 1C, this sentence is logically true. Let's go ahead and move on to 1E. So here we have two atomic sentences. We have B and D, and we're going to go ahead and fill that in. I left it blank so that we could fill it in together. We're going to do the first one, splitting half true, half false. So true, true, false, false. And then here we're going to alternate. So true, false, true, false. And that's all of our, all we have to do to set up the truth table with those basics. Now we're going to use the truth values there to do the rest of it. So here our main connective is a disjunction, right? We have this or here bolded, so we need to work one disjunct at a time. So here we have a conjunction with the negation of B and the negation of D, so we need to fill in those negations. For the negation of B, we look at that first column with the values of B and flip them. So here we have false, false, true, true. And then the negation of D, we have false, true, false, true, because D goes true, false, true, false. So now we look at that conjunction, right? We need to remember that a conjunction is true when both conjuncts are true and false otherwise. So they're both false on the first row, so false. Not B is false here, so the conjunction is false. On the third row, not D is false, so it's false. And only on the fourth row is not B and not D both true. So it's true right here on that last row. Now let's look at the other disjunct. We've got, it's not the case that B or D. So here we're going to fill in B or D, right? So we've got true, 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 and false. Because remember, the a disjunction is only false when both disjuncts are false, which we only have down here on row 4. So now we're going to take the negation of it. We're going to say false, 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 true. And now we can go ahead and do that central disjunction. So the columns that we're looking at for our main connective there, the two that matter for this disjunct, are this column and this column. And we need at least one of them to be true for it to be true on a given row. So in the first row, that conjunction is false and that negation is false, so it's false here. Same on the next row, the conjunction is false and the negation is false, so it's false there. Here the negation is false and the conjunction is false, so again. And then only on this last row do we have a true conjunction and a true negation. So it's true here. So now we look at our truth table and we ask what the logical truth value is. Is it possible logically for this sentence to be true? Yes, it is. It's true on row 4. And is it possible for this sentence to be false? Yes, it is. It's false on rows 1, 2, and 3. So 1E is logically indeterminate. It's possible for it to be true right here, and it's possible for it to be false on all the other rows. So this is a logically indeterminate sentence. So now let's do 1G. 1G has 3 atomic sentences, A, B, and C. So we've got to do an 8-row truth table, which I showed you how to do in the 3.1 video. I'm sure you were hoping to avoid it forever, but here we go. So as I showed you then, to set it up, in the first column, we're going to take the number of rows, which is 8, and we're going to divide it in half and do the first half true and the second half false. So that's 4 trues in a row. And then that's 4 falses in a row. So in the second column for B, we're going to take that number, divide it in half again. So we're going to go 2 trues in a row, and then 2 falses in a row, 2 trues in a row, and 2 falses. And in the last column, we divide that in half again. So now we're at 1. We're going to alternate true and false all the way down the table. And now we have all the possible combinations of truth values for A, B, and C. So now let's move on to the parts of this sentence. The first thing we have is A or B. So we need to look at the columns with A and B, the first 2 columns, and find the ones where one, the other, or both are true. So for column 1, A and B are both true. Or row 1 and 2, they're both true. For row 3, A is true. For row 4, A is true. For row 5, B is true. For row 6, B is true. And then for row 7 and 8, both A and B are false. So that's the truth values for A or B going down that column. So now we need to do the other side of this conjunction, A or C. So for the first row, A and C are both true. For the second row, A is true. For the third row, they're both true. For the fourth row, A is true. For the fifth row, C is true. They're both false on the sixth row. C is true on the seventh row. And then they're both false on that 8th row. So now we can go through and do this conjunction. So conjunctions are true when they're both true. So the first 4 columns, they're both true. And then for the 5th column, they're both true. And then on the last 3, one, the other, or both are false. So now we have our antecedent done. We have that conjunction of those two disjunctions done. That's the truth value of our antecedent. So now let's look at our consequent. We have the negation of B and C. So first we need to do B and C. On the first row, they're both true, so it's true. And then C is false, then B is false, then C is false. And then they're both true here. On the fifth row, then C is false, then B is false, then they're both false. So we've got 4 falses and we've got 6 falses and 2 trues. So now we're going to do the negation. We're going to flip that. False, true, 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 false, true, true, true. So now I'm going to go ahead and italicize the columns that we're looking at to make it easier to be clear which ones we're looking at for doing that main connective. This is going to be harder when you're doing things in writing. But you always want to make really clear that you're referring to the right column, that you're doing the right thing when doing this. So highlights, underlines, things like that can be really helpful. So now we have our 2 italic columns, so we know what we're looking at. Remember, I'm going to say it for the millionth time, a conditional is only false when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false, which is what we have here on row 1. So it is false on row 1. They're both true, so it's true on row 2, 3, and 4. Here again, we have a true antecedent and a false consequent, so it's false on row 5. Then we have a true consequence and false antecedents the rest of the way down, which makes the conditional true. So now we have 6 rows on which it's true and 2 rows on which it's false, which means 1G, this sentence as well, is logically indeterminate. It's possible for the sentence to be false, as we see on rows 1 and 5, and it's possible for this sentence to be true, which we see on rows 2 through 3 and 6 through 8. So now let's look at the last one that I asked you to do for that recommended practice. We're back down to only a 4-row truth table, which is really helpful here. So let's go ahead and fill that in quickly. Now we're just going to look and see that this biconditional is our main connective. So this is what's going to be our bolded column that we're looking at when we evaluate the whole sentence. Let's start with the left half. So we're just going to repeat the truth values for J. And then our other disjunct here is not K. So we're going to flip the truth values for K. So instead of true, false, we're going to say false, true, true. And now we can do that, that disjunction, right? That's true unless they're both false. So it's true here, false here, because they're both false on row 3, and then true here, because we have at least one true sentence. Now let's go to the other side. We have K and J and the material conditional, which in other practice problems, I've just simplified and just done one column, but here I wanted to fill them in. So we're going to have true, false, and then, and the reason I wanted to make sure to just fill this in is because our antecedent is K, and then our consequent is J. So if we're not careful when looking at this, we might get them inverted in our head, and then not be very clear on what we're doing, right? So we want to make sure that we're looking at K as our antecedent and J as our consequent. So just filling them in can be really helpful. So now let's go ahead and work our way down. It's true because they're both true. True because our antecedent is false and our consequent is true, so it's still true there. And then here we have a true antecedent and a false consequent, so it's false. And then here they're both false, so that that conditional is true. So now let's go to our first negation. We're going to negate this column here for the whole conditional. So now we're going to say false, false, true, false. Then we're going to do the negation process again from that negated column. So we're going to flip them back to true, true, false, true. Now we're going to do the biconditional, but I'm going to go ahead and italicize the columns that we're focusing on again, just to make it more clear. So now you can see by the columns I've italicized, we're looking at this last negation, the negation that governs the rest of this side of the biconditional. And we're looking at this disjunction here, because that disjunction governs everything in parentheses on this side. So remember, a biconditional is true when the truth values of the two sides match, and it's false otherwise. So here we have true for both, false for both, which makes it true, and then true for both, which still makes it true. Those truth values match on every row. So the biconditional is true on every row. So here we have another logically true sentence. There is no row on which it's possible for this sentence to be false. It's true on every single row. It's a logically true sentence. So I hope this was helpful to you, and that the dogs in the background didn't make too much noise and weren't too distracting. And I hope this does offer some clarity after you've worked through these problems yourself.